blue water of the Atlantic. Chapter 1, Portrait. An early Monday breeze swept over the crowds gathered to witness the departure of the so-called unsinkable ship, the SS Aqua. This massive vessel, measuring an astonishing 801 feet in length and weighing over 52,311 tons, stood as a marvel of engineering and elegance. The ship's fresh coat of white, navy blue, and gold paint gave off a sharp, vibrant scent that mingled with the salty sea air, filling the noses of eager passengers waiting to board. "Set up now! Set the sails up!" one of the third officers commanded. Slowly, the ship's sails at both the bow and stern unfurled against the thin blue sky. Its 4 towering smokestacks, painted black with golden crowns, began to belch out thick, dark plumes. "All right, give me your class number, name, and ticket," the stewards instructed passengers, checking their credentials as they boarded. The SS Aqua was departing from Liverpool, UK, bound for Philadelphia, United States. As the clock struck 11, the ship's bell rang out across the harbor, and its deep horn bellowed. Below deck, in the boiler rooms, coal shovelers worked tirelessly, feeding the fiery furnaces to generate steam. With a gradual yet determined pace, the Aqua eased away from the bustling port of Liverpool, gliding toward the icy waters of the Atlantic. The city glowed in the soft morning light, its citizens waving goodbye to loved ones or marveling at the luxurious liner making its maiden voyage. On board, a finely tuned hierarchy of crew and officers ensured the ship's smooth operation, led by Captain Robert Edwards. Stewards attended to the passengers, while mail carriers organized letters destined for the New World. Even an orchestra, doubling as entertainers and morning heralds, promised daily performances of folk songs and classical pieces to wake the guests in style. The Aqua was not just a vessel, it was a floating palace. Its dining rooms gleamed with gold and silver utensils, chandeliers casting glittering reflections onto the finely set tables. First-class cabins rivaled the opulence of a grand hotel, featuring 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, and 2 sitting rooms, all appointed with the finest furnishings and decor. This voyage was more than a journey, it was an experience. Passengers marveled at the Aqua's beauty, its grandeur, and its reputation as a marvel of modern engineering. Few could imagine that even the mightiest of oceans could challenge such a ship. As Liverpool faded into the distance, the SS Aqua surged forward, its passengers and crew brimming with anticipation for the adventure that awaited in Philadelphia. Chapter 2, Her Beauty. The SS Aqua sailed majestically across the rolling waves of the Atlantic, her grandeur a spectacle to behold. Passengers filled the decks, basking in the ship's luxurious atmosphere. During dinner in the grand dining hall, a family of 4 shared a table with Mr. Temperance, the ship's visionary designer. "This ship," Mr. Temperance began, his voice calm yet authoritative, "was built to be a palace on water. Her beauty and decor were my utmost priorities." He paused, allowing the diners to admire their surroundings, the golden chandeliers casting warm light on the polished silverware. One of the family members asked about the ship's famed title, Unsinkable. "It's quite simple," Mr. Temperance explained confidently. "The Aqua was engineered with watertight compartments. Even if water breaches the bow or stern, up to 4 compartments can flood without compromising her buoyancy." He gestured to the dining hall. "Her design represents progress, but also a sense of elegance. The lifeboats, a mere 16 in number, were kept minimal to preserve the uninterrupted view of the horizon. After all, she's a ship meant to inspire awe." A murmur of agreement swept the table, and Mr. Temperance raised his glass. "To the maiden voyage of the Aqua," he declared. The hall erupted in cheers, the clinking of glasses mingling with the melodies of the orchestra. Outside, the Aqua shimmered in the moonlight, the dark blue waters of the North Atlantic rippling against her hull. Her 4 smokestacks released faint trails into the starry sky, a testament to her steady progress. In the main lounge, John Warner, the managing director of the Blue Liner Company, basked in the moment. He had overseen the Aqua's construction and spoke proudly to a group of admirers. "This is a marvelous day," Warner said with a broad smile. "Since 1911, we've been preparing for this moment. And now, here she is, on April 4th, 1913, our masterpiece brought to life." Laughter and conversation filled the ship as the orchestra transitioned into a lively tune. Passengers danced, mingled, and reveled in the festive atmosphere. Outside, the icy waters stretched endlessly, a serene backdrop to the celebrations aboard the Aqua. Though night had fallen, the ship remained alive with light and joy, a beacon of human achievement and elegance. For those aboard the Aqua, this was more than a voyage. It was a dream brought to life, with promises of more beautiful days to come. Chapter 3. Fame for First. The SSS Aqua was not merely a vessel. It was a stage for the wealthy and the prominent to bask in their privilege and prestige. Among the glittering elite in first class, a select few stood out as titans of industry and culture, their presence cementing the ship's status as a floating symbol of luxury. Calvert James, one of the wealthiest passengers aboard, was a man whose empire spanned 4 grand hotels and 2 thriving businesses. Standing on the deck alongside the ship's designer, Mr. Temperance, James gazed at the expanse of the North Atlantic. "This ship," James declared with a grand gesture, "is nothing short of God's creation. It's an honor to be here." Nearby, Jacob Earlyton, another influential businessman, marveled at the Aqua's craftsmanship. "This is just pure beauty," he muttered, his words barely audible over the hum of conversation and the distant tunes of the orchestra. Adding a touch of glamour to the voyage was Amelia Milton, an acclaimed actress celebrated for her talent and grace. Draped in a luxurious gown, she leaned on the polished railing of the promenade deck, her eyes reflecting the ship's glowing lights. "What a palace," Amelia whispered, her voice tinged with awe. The Aqua had indeed captured the hearts of its most illustrious guests. First-class accommodations were unrivaled, a testament to the ship's opulence. Suites featured expansive queen-sized beds, lavish sitting rooms, and private bathrooms adorned with fine porcelain and brass fixtures. Dining rooms served meals on gold-trimmed china, and the air was filled with an almost intoxicating mix of wealth, privilege, and indulgence. Below the splendor of Deck A, however, a stark contrast unfolded. Second-class passengers occupied decks C and D, where rooms were modest yet comfortable, equipped with single bedrooms and shared sitting areas. Bunk beds lined the walls, a design that blended functionality with a touch of elegance. On the lower decks in third class, the passengers were a mix of immigrants yearning for a new life in America. For them, the Aqua represented hope. Tickets priced at a mere $6 afforded them a place on this floating colossus, albeit in the simplest of accommodations. Third-class rooms were warm and practical, with 2 bunk beds, a small sink, and little else. While first class reveled in unparalleled luxury, the lower classes were worlds apart, their aspirations and experiences separated by decks and wealth. Yet, regardless of status, every passenger shared a sense of awe at the Aqua's majesty. The ship sailed steadily at a maximum of 23 knots, a marvel of speed and power. To the first-class elite, it was a crown jewel. To the second-class modernists, a sign of progress. And to the third-class hopefuls, a vessel carrying dreams of a brighter future. Chapter 4. America Waits. As dawn broke over the Atlantic, the SS Aqua came alive with the stirring of its passengers. Sunlight sparkled on the waves, casting a golden glow over the ship's pristine decks. The passengers gathered eagerly, many wrapped in warm coats against the brisk morning air, marveling at the vastness of the ocean as the crew drove the ship full steam ahead toward America. The ship's stewards moved deftly through the cabins, tending to their daily tasks with precision. Beds were made, towels collected, and laundry delivered fresh. Their work was quiet but essential, a rhythm that kept the ship running as smoothly as her engines. In the captain's quarters, the officers convened to report the state of the ship. Captain Robert Edwards, a seasoned and steady leader, stood by a large map spread across the table, charting their progress. "Well, men, how are we on this fine morning?" Captain Edwards asked, his voice carrying a tone of calm authority. "Good, sir," replied First Officer Will Mack, snapping a crisp salute. "All engines full," confirmed First Class Officer Carl Trem, his words a testament to the Aqua's steady progress across the icy waters. The camaraderie among the officers was evident, each man dedicated to ensuring the ship's success. Despite their professional demeanor, they were not just seamen. They were men with lives, dreams, and families waiting for their return. Like many aboard, they harbored their own anticipation of seeing America, a land of promise and opportunity. On deck, Passengers wandered or sat on benches, taking in the ship's beauty and the endless expanse of the Atlantic. The gentle hum of the engines below and the faint melodies from the orchestra created an atmosphere of peace and grandeur. The SSS Aqua was more than a vessel. It was a shared journey. The passengers and crew alike, whether wealthy elites, hopeful immigrants, or hardworking sailors, found themselves united in one thing: the anticipation of their destination. Chapter 5: Distress at Sea. The moon hung low over the SS Aqua, casting its silvery glow on the ship as it sliced through the icy waters of the Atlantic. Passengers milled about, some retreating to their cabins, others gathering on the deck for a smoke. Among them was Barbara, an 18-year-old first-class musician. She wandered to the railing with a cigar, gazing at the shimmering waves below, the cold air brushing her face. Below, on Deck B, the atmosphere was far less serene. The radio room buzzed with activity as radio operator Felix Windows intercepted a transmission. "Coast Guard just sent an ice warning," Felix reported, his voice cutting through the chatter. He signaled back, "We're holding steady out here. We'll keep watch." The warnings didn't stop there. Radio operators aboard nearby vessels echoed similar messages, cautioning of numerous icebergs in the area. "Send out the watchkeepers," ordered Captain Edwards. High above the ship on the crow's nest, Mark and Andrew, the designated watchkeepers, braced themselves against the biting wind. The cold had intensified, and the breath from their mouths formed visible clouds in the frigid night air. "Cold night, eh?" Andrew muttered. "Cold enough to smell ice," Mark joked with a weak chuckle. They scanned the dark horizon, their sharp eyes on alert. Below, passengers lingered in the grand staircase, the dining rooms, and first-class halls. Many commented on the bitter chill, warming their hands with their breath. "It feels like we're in the Arctic," one passenger quipped, pulling their coat tighter. The orchestra's music drifted faintly through the air, a calm veneer over the rising tension. Suddenly, a sharp cry broke the stillness from the crow's nest. "Ice! Ice ahead! Iceberg! Dead ahead!" Andrew bellowed. The lookout's shout sent shockwaves across the deck. "Will!" The first officer turned toward the ship's wheel, shouting commands to the steward at the helm. Captain Edwards, who had been at the bridge, sprang into action. "Turn hard to port," the captain ordered as he rushed to the engine room telegraph. The lever was thrown, and the great ship groaned as her bow began to turn. Through the fog, a massive ice field loomed into view, towering nearly 100 feet high and stretching across the Aqua's path. Before the ship could fully pivot, a bone-chilling sound filled the night. The iceberg scraped against the Aqua's hull with an agonizing screech. The ship trembled, the vibrations reverberating through its steel frame. In the storage rooms below, water began to pour in through a jagged tier spanning 6 compartments. Bolts popped like gunfire as luggage was thrown from shelves, chaos erupting as seawater surged forward. Above deck, passengers gasped at the sight of the iceberg as it drifted past, its icy surface looming just outside the railings. The engines sputtered to a stop, and the Aqua now lay motionless in the middle of the frigid Atlantic. "What's going on here, boys?" Captain Edwards demanded, striding back onto the bridge. "An iceberg, sir," Will replied, his voice trembling. "We turned as hard as we could, but she still hit." Captain Edwards frowned, cutting Will off. "Close the watertight doors." "They're already closed, sir," Will responded. The captain nodded grimly. "Good. Now send for Mr. Temperance. We need him here immediately." "Yes, sir," Will answered, rushing to carry out the command. As Captain Edwards peered down at the damage from the bridge, the icy wind whipped across his face. The ship that had once been a beacon of luxury and resilience now stood vulnerable, wounded in the unforgiving waters of the North Atlantic. The night had turned deadly, and for the passengers and crew of the Aqua, the dream of smooth sailing was shattered. Chapter 6: Nighttime Panic. "All right, so we've hit an iceberg, and Officer Will reports 6 compartments breached," Captain Edwards said hurriedly as he and Mr. Temperance rushed through the halls. Passengers in their cabins overheard snippets of conversation, their murmurs rippling into uneasy chatter. "This might be bad," a passenger whispered, clutching their coat tighter. Carrying the ship's blueprints, Mr. Temperance followed Captain Edwards into the meeting room where several crew members and John Warner, the ship's managing director, awaited anxiously. Mr. Temperance unrolled the blueprints on the table, his hands trembling as he gestured to the affected areas. "So, Aqua has taken on water in 6 compartments, correct?" he asked, his voice taut with tension. Sweat dripped from his brow as the assembled crew nodded grimly. "That's 6 compa," Temperance began, but his explanation was cut short. "When can we get moving again? Damn it!" John Warner bellowed, slamming a hand on the table. Temperance flinched, but steadied himself. "Sir, that's 6 compartments breached. Aqua was designed to stay afloat with 5, but not 6. The room fell silent. "What are you saying?" Warner asked, his voice quieter now, but no less intense. "I'm saying," Temperance gulped, "that within this much damage, she will founder." "But she's unsinkable," Warner retorted, his words almost desperate. "She's made of iron, sir. I assure you, she can sink. And she will." Temperance's words landed heavily on the room. "How much time do we have?" Captain Edwards asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "An hour. Maybe 2, Temperance said solemnly. Warner exchanged a grim look with the captain. "Alert the passengers. Get everyone into life vests and up to the decks," Edwards ordered the stewards. He turned to Second Officer Roger Truly. "Begin uncovering the lifeboats immediately." "Yes, sir," Roger said, rushing out with a team of crewmen to prepare the lifeboats. Edwards made his way to the radio room, where Felix Windows was already signaling a distress call. "What's the status?" Edwards asked, sweat dripping from his brow. "The RMS Clemson is en route, but it's 4 hours out," Felix reported nervously. 4 hours, Edwards repeated in disbelief, staring at the radio operator before turning to leave. Outside, the ship's horn blared, waking passengers across all decks. Stewards knocked on cabin doors, urging passengers to put on their life vests and move to the upper decks. Confusion and panic began to ripple through the halls and staircases as men, women, and children hurriedly dressed and clutched their belongings. "Do you want women and children first, sir?" Roger asked as passengers began gathering near the lifeboats. "Yes, women and children first," Edwards confirmed, his voice cracking slightly. Roger nodded and began directing the evacuation, his voice firm as he called for order among the increasingly frightened crowd. Captain Edwards stepped onto the main deck, the cold wind biting through his uniform. From the bridge, he looked down toward the bow, where water was already spilling over the deck's edge. The Aqua, once the epitome of elegance and engineering, was now fighting a losing battle against the unforgiving Atlantic. As the orchestra's music faltered, replaced by the shouts of crew and passengers, the gravity of the situation became undeniable. The night, so tranquil just hours before, had turned into a desperate race against time. The unsinkable ship was sinking. Chapter 7. The Sinking Beauty. Panic consumed the SS Aqua as passengers rushed to the upper decks, desperate for a chance at survival. Below deck, chaos reigned among the third-class passengers who found themselves locked behind gates. "You'll come up after first class is settled in the boats," barked the stewards, their voices drowned out by the angry cries of the locked-out crowd. The rioters banged on the gates, pleading and shouting in vain. Above deck, the evacuation fared no better. Lifeboat 3, meant to hold 35 passengers, was launched with only 20 aboard. Mr. Temperance, standing near the davits, watched in disbelief. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted, his frustration palpable. "They're supposed to be full. Lives are at stake." "Sorry, sir," mumbled Second Officer Roger, but the error repeated with boat after boat. The crew's inexperience and mounting panic left precious seats empty as lifeboats descended into the icy waters. Meanwhile, water continued to flood the ship, breaching the bridge and spilling into the officers' quarters. Captain Edwards, standing near the wheel, surveyed the chaos around him. Screams echoed through the air as passengers ran in every direction. Some leapt overboard in despair, disappearing into the dark Atlantic. The captain, composed in his final moments, turned to the orchestra. "Play something soft," he instructed. "Keep them calm." The musicians obeyed, their trembling hands plucking the somber melody of "Nearer, My God, to Thee." The tune floated hauntingly over the decks as the ship's lights flickered and dimmed, casting the Aqua in ghostly shadows. By now, water had surged into Deck E, the lowest part of the ship, where third-class passengers had waited in vain for rescue. The gates gave way under the pressure, releasing a torrent of water that swept them away. Screams echoed through the narrow corridors as passengers were carried helplessly by the icy flood. On the upper decks, first-class passengers fared little better. At 1:04 a.m., the sea breached the grand staircase, sending a cascading wave through the once opulent halls. People trampled over one another in blind terror as water rushed in, sweeping them away in its relentless tide. The ship groaned, the sound of bending iron and twisting steel a chilling reminder of her imminent demise. Above the bridge, a group of desperate passengers crowded around a lifeboat. Frantic, they pushed and kicked a crewman who struggled to untie the ropes. Then a deafening crack shattered the air. One of the funnels, its supporting ropes weakened by the water's force, broke loose. The towering structure crashed onto the deck, crushing the struggling passengers and smashing the lifeboat beneath its weight. Amid the chaos, Captain Edwards remained at his post. Water surged into the officers' quarters, shattering windows and flooding the room. The captain clung to the ship's wheel as the freezing water consumed him, his resolve unwavering to the bitter end. As the Aqua's bow dipped further into the icy Atlantic, the ship began to rise by the stern, her final act a grim testament to the arrogance of her unsinkable design. For those left aboard, hope dwindled with every passing moment. The once majestic liner, a symbol of beauty and luxury, was now a crumbling monument to tragedy. Chapter 8: She Splits. As water surged relentlessly through the SS Aqua, it consumed everything in its path, cabins, hallways, and dining areas. Passengers and crew alike were swept into the frigid Atlantic, their cries swallowed by the roaring sea. The ship, once a symbol of elegance and safety, was now fully engulfed in chaos. By now, the waterline had reached the compass platform, a key navigation point now rendered useless. Another funnel groaned under its own weight and fell with a deafening crash, tearing through the decks below. The steep tilt of the ship's bow made lowering lifeboats impossible. The crew abandoned their efforts and joined the throng of over 1,000 passengers, fleeing to the stern, the last refuge on the ship. The deck, angled sharply, became a treacherous slope. Desperate people clung to railings and walls, while others lost their grip, sliding down into the icy waters or striking the ship's towering propellers, their bodies flung into the sea. Among the chaos, Officer Will, overwhelmed by the agony of witnessing so much suffering, made his final choice. Silently, he leapt from the ship, diving headfirst into the water. He never resurfaced. "Hold on!" Roger shouted to those still clinging to hope. But the ship's structure had reached its breaking point. A thunderous groan of twisting steel echoed across the ocean as a massive crack appeared near the midsection of the Aqua. The ship quivered violently, then snapped in two with a deafening roar. The stern section crashed back into the water, its impact crushing passengers clinging to debris or struggling to swim away. The bow, dragged down by the flooded compartments, broke away entirely and began its final descent into the ocean's depths. Underwater, the ship's lights glowed eerily, flickering out as the bow was swallowed by the sea, leaving only silence in its wake. The stern, now separated from the bow, briefly steadied before beginning its own slow, inevitable plunge. Funnels collapsed, and the shredded sails fluttered down like ghostly remnants of a ship once alive with grandeur. Passengers clung desperately to the railings as the stern lifted upright, pointing skyward in a haunting final salute to the heavens. For a moment, it seemed suspended in time. Then, with a violent pull, it began to sink. People were hurled into the water as the stern section vanished beneath the waves, its disappearance marked by a gurgling roar and a rush of air. The once mighty 802-foot-long Aqua was gone, torn apart and consumed by the icy Atlantic. Hundreds of survivors, now adrift in the freezing water, screamed for help. Many clung to debris or overturned lifeboats, their voices fading into the night as hypothermia claimed them. Above, the stars shone brightly, indifferent to the tragedy unfolding below. The ocean, still and vast, reclaimed its dominance, leaving behind nothing but fragments of a dream shattered by human hubris. Chapter 9: A Hero Ship. The night drifted on, and the survivors of the SS Aqua clung to what little hope they had left. The lifeboats had long since abandoned the sinking ship, their occupants shivering, exhausted, and near the brink of death. Many of them had succumbed to the brutal cold, their bodies drifting motionless on the sea as the hours passed. It was 2:34 a.m., and the lifeboats had been rowing aimlessly through the vast, unforgiving ocean for hours. At 3:43 a.m., a faint light appeared in the distance. The weary survivors, weak from exposure, strained their eyes. It was a ship, a rescue ship, finally. The RMS Clemson, the very vessel they had called for help 4 hours earlier, had arrived. The Clemson, a one-funnel steam mail ship, had completed its journey from Liverpool to Philadelphia, and despite its mission to continue to the United States, had turned back to rescue the Aqua's survivors. The Clemson pulled alongside the lifeboats, and the remaining crew and passengers of the Aqua were helped aboard. Captain Tilton of the Clemson welcomed them, offering them warmth and shelter on board. The survivors were ushered into the safe embrace of the Clemson, their ordeal on the Aqua now over. The ship continued on its journey to Philadelphia, where it would dock and, in a strange twist of fate, take the spot where the Aqua had once been expected to arrive. The loss of the Aqua marked the beginning of a new chapter for the Clemson. As the Clemson sailed into the harbor, survivors helped each other off the ship and were escorted into the city, their once dramatic story now one of survival. The Aqua, though lost to the waves, would live on in the memories of those who survived, as well as in the stories passed down through generations. Despite over 70 years of degradation, the wreck was still recognizable, with remnants of the grand vessel visible in the depths. Dr. Baller's discovery brought the legend of the Aqua back to the public's attention. The Aqua's story would continue to be told for generations to come. Though the ship had sunk into the icy waters of the Atlantic, her story lived on in the hearts of those who survived, and in the story of a ship, the RMS Clemson, which had saved them when all seemed lost.